The moon hung low in the ink-black sky, casting elongated shadows across the cemetery grounds. A thin mist slithered between the gravestones, chilling the air as I embarked on my path home. The wind whispered through the gnarled trees, carrying with it an unsettling sense of anticipation. I pulled my coat tighter around me and quickened my pace, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the only sound breaking the stillness. I've always taken the shortcut through the cemetery, a choice met with raised eyebrows and hushed whispers by friends and family. But it saved me a good half hour of walking, and I'd never found the place eerie before tonight. Tonight, however, the air was different, electric with an otherworldly energy that crawled beneath my skin. As I walked, I tried to keep my gaze straight ahead, avoiding the grave markers that seemed to leer at me from the corners of my eyes. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. It was as if the very ground beneath me held a memory of all those who had passed, and they were restless. The path I took led me deeper into the heart of the cemetery. The headstones grew older and more weathered, some of them tilting at odd angles as if desperately reaching out for something. The mist clung to my clothes, dampening them as I pressed forward. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a shiver ran down my spine as a gust of wind carried a distant, mournful wail. I picked up my pace, my footsteps echoing in the silence, each sound amplified by the unsettling emptiness around me. I glanced around, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being followed. But the darkness seemed to stretch and shift, and I could swear I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I stumbled over a loose stone, catching myself just before I fell. The laughter of a child echoed in the distance, but there was no child to be seen. The path ahead split into two, and I hesitated for a moment before choosing the narrower one on the left. The mist was thicker here, swirling around me like ghostly fingers, and I could almost make out whispered voices carried on the wind. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, and that's when I saw her. A woman in a flowing white dress standing among the graves. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at her. Her skin was pale, her eyes dark and empty, and her hair hung in damp tendrils around her face. I couldn't tear my gaze away from her, even as her lips moved and I heard her whisper my name. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, my heart pounding like a drum. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the night. I didn't dare to look back, fearing what I might see. The path seemed to stretch on forever, the gravestones blurring into a nightmarish haze. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. The wind howled around me, carrying with it the agonized cries of 100 lost souls. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, and I tumbled into an open grave. I hit the bottom with a jolt, pain shooting through my body. I looked up, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and found myself surrounded by the decaying remains of the long-forgotten dead. The walls of the grave seemed to close in on me, and I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down. I screamed, my voice swallowed by the darkness, as skeletal hands reached out from the walls, grasping for me. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse, as if the very earth was alive and hungry. I clawed at the dirt, scrambling to escape, but it was no use. The hands closed in, their grip unrelenting, pulling me further into the suffocating abyss. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The hands released their hold, and I found myself lying on the cold ground, gasping for air. I was back on the path, the mist swirling around me. The moon had disappeared, leaving me in total darkness. The wind had died down, and an eerie calm settled over the cemetery. Trembling, I got to my feet, my body aching as if I had truly been pulled into the grave. My mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion, and I stumbled forward, desperate to get out of this nightmare. As I walked, the path seemed to stretch and twist, leading me in circles. The graves themselves began to shift, their positions changing as if rearranged by unseen hands. I felt a rising sense of hopelessness, a realization that I was trapped in this graveyard maze forever. Every step I took led me deeper into the heart of the darkness, and the whispers grew louder, the voices overlapping and intertwining in a cacophony of agony. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to shut out the sound, but it seeped into my mind like a poison. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face, as I begged for release from this nightmare. The ground beneath me trembled, and I looked up to see a figure emerging from the mist. It was the woman in white, her empty eyes fixed on me. She reached out a hand, her fingers skeletal and cold, and I knew in that moment that she was the one who had led me into this hellish trap. With a scream of desperation, I pushed myself to my feet and ran, ignoring the pain in my legs and the burning in my chest. The path seemed to stretch on forever, the mist swirling around me like a living entity. I didn't dare to look back, fearing what I might see behind me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the mist cleared, and I stumbled out onto a familiar street. The moon hung low in the sky, and a cool breeze ruffled my hair. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, tears of relief streaming down my face. I was free. But as I looked back at the cemetery, I knew that I had only escaped by the skin of my teeth. The woman in white stood at the edge of the graveyard, her eyes boring into mine. I could almost hear her whisper on the wind, promising that she would always be waiting, just beyond the threshold between the living and the dead. From that day on, I never took the shortcut through the cemetery again. The memory of that night haunted my dreams, a reminder that some paths are best left untraveled. The dead, it seemed, were not content to rest in peace, and the boundary between the worlds was thinner than I had ever imagined.